Don and Mike, brew-dudes.com, and here we are talking about liquid yeast strains. Yes, that's right. I have a story to tell, and then Mike said, you know what, let's open up the old camera and talk more about that with our audience. And so I'll tell a story. Gather around the monitor, and we'll talk more about my latest liquid yeast problem. So I ordered the ingredients for the Munich Helles as a part of our Jar of Destiny competition, challenge, whatever the heck it is. And I ordered 2308 Y yeast, the Munich lager strain, and I had that shipped to me along with all the other ingredients. And the homebrew shop put in an ice pack, but of course we've had super high temperatures here in the Northern Hemisphere during the summer months. And so it took a couple of days to get to my house from the shop. And so when I got it, my plan was always to make a starter, but when I did hit those smack packs, they didn't exactly swell to any volume that I'm used to. But again, I said, well, there might be something still in there that's viable, and that's why we're making a starter. We'll see what's going on. The only other caveat I have to the story is that when I looked at the expiration date, I basically had one more month to go before it was beyond the best used by day. So I said, hey, another thing in my favor, let's go for it. So did a small starter. It was probably more like a 3-liter starter, just under a gallon in US terms, and used just dry malt extract. You know, you've done a starter, right? So boiled, chilled it down to fermentation temperature. I poured the contents of the 2 smack packs that I had into the vessel, and then just swirled it, and then checked on it, swirled it, checked on it, swirled it, checked on it, and saw that there was pretty much no activity. The contents of each smack pack also kind of looked like, the color of peanut butter. There really wasn't a lot of activity, it seemed, from that. So after about 3 days, I gave up on that and said I'm going to drive up to the homebrew shop and then basically caress those packages on the way home in my air-conditioned car so that we didn't have the high temperatures in the back of some delivery van or truck. So, but there's still a challenge of getting quality liquid yeast. May it be shipped to you, or I'm not even sure if I'm getting the best quality of driving up there and getting it. So I told my tale of sort of woe to Mike, and he's like, all right, I got some things to say. So I'm going to hand it over to him because I haven't sipped this beer yet. This is the cream ale.
Nova Lager cream ale.
Excellent. So thank you, Nova Lager. So I will drink and I'll let you
yield the floor.
Yeah, just let it rip.
This brings up something that I've been observing for a long time, and I haven't really thought about it a lot or investigated it deeply because I think it requires a little bit of some science. But I think if you don't live within a half a state radius of these major yeast labs that provide yeast, Y Yeast, White Labs, Omega, these guys, when you're shipping those yeast, because I've noticed this even before when it was just Y Yeast and White Labs, right? To ship those yeast across country, I assume they're shipping them in big, like type of cooler boxes with tons of ice packs. But when they arrived at an East Coast homebrew store, and you've got all these other things to unpack at the homebrew store, I just wonder, like, what's the real stress level on that yeast and the viability of that yeast by the time it gets to us here on the East Coast? I remember reading a lot of forums about people pitching in just like a 1045 or a 1050 and under gravity beer, pitching 1 pack of WLP 009, and it was fermenting within 8 hours. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen just pitching in that scenario within 24 hours activity, right? And I've been brewing for a really long time. And so this isn't to say that starters aren't necessary. In fact, in those examples, they are necessary. I don't know what the impact is of doing a starter per se with, say, a package that's, say, 90% still viable, and let's just call it fresh for a minute, 90% fresh, versus making a starter with something that's 30% fresh. You're certainly not going to end up with the same cell numbers at the end of that. Not that that's super important these days anyway. I think there's conflicting evidence on that, right? And we can talk about that another time. But I guess I just sort of think that sometimes we're at a real handicap here if your homebrew shop doesn't take care of it. Now, when you order yeast, because I had the same situation, when you order yeast from your homebrew shop, they are obviously going to go through their inventory and pull the oldest stuff, right? I've actually been to a homebrew shop here in the Northeast where they've had some of those things that were past their expiration dates and put them on like 50% sale.
Right.
And I've bought them thinking, oh, I'll buy 3 of them, and then try to put them in a starter. They don't do anything. I mean, so it's really challenging. I remember when we had our interview with Chris White. I don't think we asked this question on camera. I think I asked it to him afterwards. I specifically asked him, "What do you know about this? Have you done any research in this idea of shipping yeast all the way to us into our homebrew stores, and what's the health of it versus when it left?" And sort of like most breweries, they often talk about once we put the beer in the packages and go out the door, we have no control over it really, right?
Yeah.
I think that's why, to some extent too, White Labs has opened a lab in Asheville, North Carolina, I think, right? So they're at least having a presence on the East Coast to give us fresher yeast here and give all the breweries that, it's not just home brewers that suffer from this, I'm sure too. Now let's talk about like Omega. They were one of the first, or Imperial Yeast was one of the first labs to start like double the yeast count versus what White Labs and Yeast are normally providing. Now White Labs, their newest pure pitch package, has got a bigger pitch count. And I think these things are to combat the fact that liquid yeast doesn't like to ship very well.
Yeah.
So so that brings me to my next point is I've been having an incredible amount of success when I'm ordering stuff from our local shop of just using dry yeast.
Yeah.
And the other thing, someone recently asked, we recently had a conversation with some people about this question, like the variety of dry yeast now and the quality of dry yeast is excellent.
Yeah.
I think in one of the more recent homebrew publications, there was a conversation exactly about that. Like it's no longer sort of essentially contaminated bread yeast that they're giving you. You're getting a lot of, and these yeast companies now are figuring out new technologies to dry down some of these more challenging strains. So the variety is getting there too. So just for my peace of mind, I would rather make a beer that doesn't stress me out during that first 48 hours than try to, and I don't always have time to necessarily whip together a yeast starter. Certainly proofing your yeast somehow in what some people call a shaken starter or a vitality starter. I don't like that term either, but doing a vitality type starter is the way to go when you're using liquid yeast. I think you just have to be really conscious of what the date is on that package.
Yeah.
And if it's shipped a long way, maybe you need to be 3 or 4 months away from that best buy date, right? I don't know what their viability cutoff is, what that best buy means. Is it 50%? Is it 20% by then? I don't know. So I've been amassing some equipment to start doing some yeast cell counts myself, and I want to try to future experiment will be to actually try to document some of these things in terms of what does the cell counts, what's the viability of those cell counts. Just try to figure some of this out because I think that would be really interesting and would prove this theory I have about how here on the East Coast we seem to be at a disadvantage sometimes because there's a lot of anecdotal talk about, now it might just be macho, going on like, oh, I started fermenting right away. Maybe that's what's going on.
I opened up the packet
right?
and suddenly my beer was fermenting.
But I've been having great success with dry yeast, and I have no qualms about finding something that's in the same vein and making a beer with it. And it's in the end, it's what the beer tastes like, not necessarily how I made it. So I think it works out pretty good. So anyway, I'm curious to see what viewers who live further distance away from yeast labs, if you've had similar experiences, if you've noticed this, or maybe you're just always making a starter, so you've never seen that issue before too. You know what I mean? So that would be interesting to hear in the comments.
Well, I think the other thing about a starter, and as I was able to illustrate in that first part of the story, is making that starter and seeing nothing start up. Yeah, allowed me to say, I need.
You still had a month to go on those packets. That's just not possible.
True. but at the same time, because of knowing that, I knew that I had to go and get some somehow, right?
That's an example of yeast packages that probably sat warm either in the truck, on the loading dock, or in the back door of the homebrew shop before it went on the shelf, before it went into the fridge. So that's the only explanation I have for it.
Yep. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's also age. Those dates are on the package for a reason. I got a month to go. Again, I don't know. Like you said, it would maybe part of that experiment if you are amassing that equipment. I'm not really sure where you're getting it. Don't share it with anyone. Let's try to keep that between us. But that'd be something that maybe we buy just for the dash. Buy a packet, see the expiration date, wait for this. Throw in your fridge.
Yep.
Wait until you got a set the old reminder on your phone and say, hey, I'm going to check the viability of this yeast pack versus one that is fresher, and see what the big difference is.
The challenge would be getting a fresh pack.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that could still be a disadvantage.
Make friends with the people at the store and say, like, look, it's all for the dash.
The good thing is you can order direct right now from White
Can you?
Box.
Yeah. Okay. Give me the freshest one you can.
Shipping is really steep, but you can order direct.
Well, like I said, this is all about getting it out there. All right. Well, I'll stop there because there's more to say, but I'd rather open it up to everybody. So leave your comments and your liquid yeast woes if you have them, or any kind of recommendations you have, and or experience with liquid yeast strain. I still say, if dry yeast strains had the number of varieties or like styles that they could be used for, I'd be using dry yeast all the time. But it's all about the jar and trying to make the best style I can. So with that, if you like this video, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel because we do this kind of thing every single week. For John and Mike, brew-dudes.com, brew on.
Cheers.